Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Scholar Gladiatorius. So first of all, this is going to be a review of the new Leon Paul HEMA mask. That is right, Leon Paul are now making a HEMA specific mask, and I'll put the link below to the product below my video here. But first up, full disclosure, so Leon Paul sent this to me. I didn't pay for it, so I should say that right at the beginning. However, this is an impartial review. I'm not afraid to say that something's rubbish if I think it's rubbish. And in fact, there might be a couple of things that I'll review quite soon that I will say they're rubbish. But this is thankfully not one of them. However, it's not going to be 100% perfect review for this. First up, I just want to say this is without a shadow of a doubt one of the best made fencing masks that I have ever personally handled and seen. It's certainly the best quality mask that I've ever had. I have in the past owned Leon Paul and All-Star masks. I mean, I also know the Red Dragon masks as well, but they're very much a sort of budget economy end, so I won't compare those in the same frame of reference. But in terms of comparing the Leon Paul masks that I've had before and the All-Star masks, this is, to my way of thinking, the best made and the best mask that I have ever yet had and used. However, it's not perfect. So, first up, just to say that this is based on the exchange system. That is, you'll notice it's got a ring. I won't disassemble it on video because it would take too long to take it apart and put it back together again. It is not, as some people may have assumed, it is not a sort of 2-second job to take this bib out. Why do you need to take the bib out? Quite simply to wash it. So many of you, certainly my regular viewers, will remember that I talked about my previous Leon Paul mask and about the issue of masks smelling. And if you use a mask for years, it is a problem and bacteria get in there, and whether you freeze the mask or boil the mask or whatever you do to it, it seems to be quite difficult to get rid of that stench. But if you can remove the fabric elements, so the bib and the padding inside, then obviously it makes it easier to keep your mask clean and prevent it ever getting to that level where it's just almost unusable. In terms of the actual mask, as I say, it is based on their exchange system. So it has pretty much completely removable parts inside. The padding inside the mask, which I'll talk a bit more about in a minute, is velcroed in there, so you can just rip all of that out and throw that in the washing machine. And the bibs, which used to be fixed permanently to the masks, now have a sort of slide system. So this metal sort of tube, as it were, that goes around there, the bib actually goes into that, and obviously it's very secure and very safe. I've never seen one come off by accident, which is pretty important. They have to stay on there while you're fencing, and they do. And that seems to have been a pretty well received addition to masks, and it is Leon Paul's kind of their innovation, so kudos to Leon Paul for coming up with that. I will say though, it is not quick to take out and put back in, or rather it's quite quick to take it out, but it's not very quick to put it back in. But anyway, this mask is fairly new, so I haven't needed to actually wash any of it yet. One little quirk, which I actually think is a good thing about this exchange system, is because that tubular system goes all the way around there, around the neck, the narrowest part of the mask, the actual mesh comes down further down the side than it does on some other masks. On some other masks, including the older Leon Paul ones, or the ones without this system on, the padded bib kind of comes further up the side, and I think it's actually better having mesh further down. It gives you just that added bit of protection, because frankly, although these things are all Newton rated to whatever amount, 1600 newtons, the mesh is far stronger than the fabric is. If a blade broke, for example a rapier or a longsword or a feather blade broke, then it's far better if that broken blade hits steel mesh than if it hits fabric, because no matter how good that fabric is or isn't, that's never as strong as that mesh is. Okay, it's stainless steel mesh, so you don't have to worry about it rusting. You don't have to worry about, theoretically, just throwing the whole mask in the washing machine and washing it. So it's utilising, it's quite different to masks of, shall we say, 10 to 15 years ago, which were usually not stainless steel, and you did have rust issues if you tried to wash the whole mask. Now on to the differences between the HEMA mask and any other instructor mask from Leon Paul. Essentially, it comes down to a few small details. It isn't, by and large, it's not designed from the bottom up to be a HEMA mask. What this is, despite the fact it has, don't know if you'll be able to see, it has the word HEMA there. So it is actually labelled as a HEMA mask, but it hasn't been designed from the very bottom up to be a HEMA mask. It is simply, essentially, an instructor's fencing mask with the exchange system that has had a few things changed on it. Namely, it has got a stronger bib. So this bib is, I'm not exactly sure what the difference is between this and the standard one, but this is essentially a stronger, more resistive, stiffer bib than the standard one, or certainly the one that was being used before. The padding itself inside is larger, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. You'll notice it comes right the way down the neck, so there's nothing left exposed at the neck area. You've got very good neck protection there, and it goes all the way in to the chin and fills that area at the bottom there. Equally, you've got their so-called I can't remember what that system's called, but anyway, it's a sort of comfortable fit system. It doesn't have the hard extension that comes down the back that you find on, for example, I think All-Star masks, and well, basically all other masks. This is a Leon Paul innovation. It sits on the head more securely, I find. It has one disadvantage in that it makes putting back of head protectors on a little bit more complicated, but I'll talk about that also in a minute. So the padding inside is essentially beefed up for HEMA purposes. Now, this is where it comes to my first point of constructive criticism, or advice even. One of the problems is that what they've done is they've used the standard sizing method for normal fencing masks, but then they've jammed more padding inside. Well, very clearly, if you're a borderline medium large, which I am, and you stick more padding inside, theoretically, you're probably going to fit a large mask better than a medium mask. Now, with a normal fencing mask or an instructor's fencing mask for modern fencing, I'm an M. I've got a relatively small head, partly because I don't have any hair. However, I didn't kind of foresee how much extra padding there would be inside when I got this. So if I was ordering this again, I would probably get a size L rather than a size M, because that extra padding inside really does bulk up quite a lot. And I have to be honest, it's a little bit tight on my head. So that's one bit of advice. If you're ordering one of these, and they're not cheap bits of equipment, think about, first of all, if you can, test one out at someone who's already got one, and find out what Leon Paul's sizing is like relative to your own head. But if you're not able to do that, maybe think about getting the size above what you would normally get for a fencing mask. Okay, and that extra padding applies to everything inside, bottom, sides and top. It's all a little bit thicker, and so more impact resistance than you would find with a normal fencing mask or saber or instructor's mask. The mesh is essentially, as I understand it, exactly the same as the toughest mesh that they're using on their saber and instructor's masks. Now, a few people have said that they think that mesh is not strong enough. It's, as far as I'm aware, it's about the strongest mesh you can get on any fencing mask, any standard fencing mask in the world at the moment. Maybe it's possible, some people have suggested that maybe the All-Star masks are tougher mesh. I personally don't think so. I know there are All-Star masks in my club and I've seen them in use and they all seem to have dents on them. I had a Leon Paul mask for about 10 years prior to this one, and it never got a single dent in it. And that was fighting in many tournaments, teaching classes twice a week, sparring all the time, and it never got a single dent on it. Now, maybe that's partly because I don't get hit on the head that much, I don't know. Maybe it's more because I do saber than longsword, I don't know. But I never got a dent on that. So, and this seems to be at least as good mesh as my previous one. So to me, whilst in a perfect world, a HEMA mask would have more robust mesh even than this. In terms of what's available at the moment, unless you go for something that's not really a fencing mask, something that's more of a helmet, in terms of fencing masks, this is, I think, about the best mesh you're going to get. And you have to accept that sometimes you might get a dent in it. But so far, I haven't had a dent in any of my Leon Paul masks that I've had in the last decade. Next up is this rim around here. Now, my previous mask was the same as this and was rubber, and I have to say it got hit lots of times and it never really took any permanent damage. It got scratches and scuffs, but it didn't seem to matter. So some people might wonder whether this is the right material to be putting around here. Personally, I haven't seen a problem with it yet. So, and I haven't even heard of a problem with that yet. So for me at the moment, this rubber band, which is almost kind of keeping it's the reinforcing ridge under there, is essentially keeping the shape of the mask and the structure and keeping it all away from your head. It's essentially the helmet. That to me works and is absolutely fine for HEMA. At least if we're talking about masks adapting existing fencing masks, which is really what this is. As I mentioned, I'll reiterate that this is not designed from the bottom up as a HEMA mask, and that might be ultimately what we want and what we desire, but at the moment we don't have that. Working on masks that are essentially adapted from fencing masks, this is the most HEMA specific one that's available at the moment. The next thing, and this is something that I'm not sure that this was the right decision, and I personally wouldn't have done this. So my previous mask, which I do actually have down here, I'll just grab it. So my previous mask, which as you know now has a GoPro mounted on, a fake GoPro mounted on top of it, has a thick cylindrical section rim around the back. And this has got a rubberized surface and is incredibly rigid. Now the new Leon Paul mask has a stainless steel flat rim around the back. In my view, this is a mistake. Okay, there are two main reasons why I think that's a mistake. First of all, I think that the surface of this getting hit at the back edge is going to get scuffed up and damaged both more easily and more potentially dangerously, i.e. leaving sharp edges, than the rubber thick edge would do. The second reason why I think that should have been like the instructor's mask I just showed you was for safety and impacts against the head, which is obviously related to the first point. I think that what you don't want near the back of your head, of your bare head, and bearing in mind if you've got any back of head protection on, this is still going to be underneath that, at least in every case I've seen, is what you don't want is what's a comparatively narrow metal edge near the back of your head. I think this is a really bad idea. So I think it's going to get damaged more easily, dented more easily specifically, but also potentially chewed up by any burrs on edges and things like this. You might end up with little sharp edges on there, which you don't want near bare skin. But additionally, I think just having a narrow rim like that is a bad idea at the back of the head. I think a thicker rim that's more rigid. So this should have been more rigid and thicker. So I think that that's a bad design choice, and I would advise Leon Paul, and I have advised Leon Paul, to think about changing that back of rim. Now I know that they feel differently about it, and hopefully this should show my lack of bias in this review. If they want to stick with that, that's their choice, but my advice to them would be to change that back of rim. The next thing which is different about this mask is this. And what is that, you might be thinking? Well, quite simply, it's a clip. It's quite difficult to undo one-handed actually, but it's a clip at the back of the mask to maybe not prevent, but reduce the chances of, and it just goes around there, goes around the back of your neck, and you can extend obviously the length of it to suit whatever you've got on your neck or the size of your neck, and it clips in there. Now, I haven't personally bothered using this yet. I can't, off the top of my head, there's a pun, off the top of my head, remember a time when my mask came off the top of my head in any sparring or competitive situation. However, I do know it happens, especially in longsword fencing, where there's liable to be more grappling. And in those situations, if someone grapples you, sometimes your mask can come off. And if you're falling and there's steel weapons flying around, you don't want your mask to come off your head. So this, I think, is a really, really good idea for people who feel that they need it or want it. And for people like me who in regular weekly sparring don't feel like we need it, you can just shorten that by pulling pulling it like you would do a belt, and then clip it closed and it stays underneath the edge of the throat thing and doesn't really get in the way. So I think that's a really good addition, good suggestion, good thinking, well, it seems to be well executed, well made. But I personally probably won't be using it very much, but maybe in tournament, maybe I will. So it's a good thing. The final thing I want to talk about is back of head protection. Where is back of head protection? Now, this is really my biggest point to this review and my biggest criticism, is if you're going to make a mask for HEMA, you have to at the same time make a back of head protection for that mask. In most HEMA clubs, certainly in the UK, and in most HEMA tournaments internationally, back of head protection is mandatory to compete, because quite simply, whilst you might not want to be or intend to be hitting the back of the head, it happens. If someone's doing a certain type of zerkau in longsword, or they make a big traverse with side sword, or even in sabre, they step offline and crack you around the side of the head. There are also, or in a grappling situation where someone closes in and they push your head down and it exposes the back of the head. There's all sorts of situations where, whilst it might not be by design, but by just what happens by circumstance, the back of your head becomes exposed and you receive a hit on it. Now, very clearly, the nature of the weapons that we're using are heavy blunt steel weapons, and it could be a crossguard, it could be a pommel, but it might be a blade. And in any of those situations, you do not want that hitting the bare back of your cranium. That is bad news and potentially fatal. So therefore, it is mandatory for us to wear back of head protection. But the problem is that most of the back of head protection available is, in my opinion, totally rubbish. Utterly rubbish. And a lot of people are relying on really big back of head protectors that look like a big skirt. They've got a hard bit and a padded bit inside, and it fits to an over the top and a brow ridge top of mask protector as well. Now, I hate those things because masks are hot enough as it is. When you then stick what's the equivalent of an oven glove on top of your head and your brow and the back of your head, it's ridiculously, it's too hot, it's too bulky. Thrusts that come in the mask get caught underneath the head protector. They're rubbish. I hate those things. There are a couple of purely back of head protectors that attach to masks. However, they don't attach to Leon Paul masks very well because they've got this system at the back. They also, if you look at the Spez one, for example, they have designed wonderfully a square topped back of head protector to fit into a round mask. Is utterly idiotic, and it will only fit on large and extra large fencing masks. On a medium Leon Paul, the Spez back of head protector will not fit. I bought one, it was useless, I gave it to one of my training buddies. So it's very difficult to get hold of decent back of head protectors for any mask. But if you are, i.e. Leon Paul, making a HEMA specific mask, you have to, at the same time, make a back of head protector to go with that mask. Especially when you have a different system for holding the mask on someone's head to all of the other brands. You need something that interacts with that correctly and fits the different sizes as well, importantly. So to conclude, I think this is a fantastic mask for a mask that's based on existing fencing masks. So if we want to look for an Uber instructor's mask, an Uber fencing instructor's mask that will be really good for HEMA comparative to the other things available, this is it. It's wonderfully made, it's got some really good adaptations. It is on the expensive side, but you know, how much is your head worth, frankly? It's the most important part of protective kit. This and your gloves are the most important things that you can spend money on. They're more important than your sword. Instead of spending 100, 200, 300 pounds more on swords, think about maybe protecting your brain and your fingers, because your fingers and your brain are pretty damn important, and they're the things that operate the swords, okay? If they're not working, your sword's not going to work. If you're in a hospital with brain damage, your sword's not going to work very well. So invest in a decent mask, and this is a decent mask. But my main criticism of it is that it is not designed from the bottom up as a HEMA mask. What we need in HEMA is a mask that is designed from the very foundation upwards to be used for HEMA. Now, you might say, I'm doing rapier, so for rapier it's absolutely perfect. Yes, that's true. When I say HEMA, I don't only mean longsword, I mean sabre, backsword, messer, these other side sword, these other things as well. Rapier and small sword, you guys might be fine with standard fencing masks, but people who are going to be hit in the head with percussive blows from cut and thrust swords of real weight and balance of those types of, you know, sabres, longswords, messers, things like this, we need a different kind of mask. And fundamentally, the mask needs to be more of a helmet, it needs to be bigger, it needs to have similar or slightly more padding, or rather the padding needs to be mounted differently inside it. It needs to be away from the edges of the helmet, just as a real medieval helmet is. Maybe not directly in contact with it, but with a suspension system. And fundamentally, it needs to be made slightly differently to how a fencing mask is made, not just jamming more padding inside of a standard fencing mask. Okay, so we need something that's designed from the bottom up, probably a bit bigger, probably shaped a little bit differently than this, probably a little bit more cone-like at the front so things slide off rather than just sticking on the front and denting it. Probably we need a little bit of brow reinforcement and a bit of other reinforcement on the top, and we need back of head protectors that actually fit our masks and work. There we go, guys. I hope this has been a useful review. Cheers. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, follow us on Facebook. You can buy t-shirts through Spreadshirt, support us on Patreon, or follow us on Pinterest. Thank you.